Hi, everybody. Welcome to my home. Vivian and I are going to start in a couple of seconds. Thanks for watching.
Hey, guys. My YouTube impression.
Hey, guys.
Hey, guys. It's Viv and Chris. How are you guys doing?
5 stars. Thanks for checking out my stream.
Please
Vivian
subscribe
and I,
below.
Please hit the subscribe button and you'll get lots of cool treats. Vivian and I are obviously here to sell moon dust and other cool things that YouTube subscribers sell.
Male enhancement, supplements, that sort of thing.
Vivian, hello. How's it going?
Hi, Chris.
Hi.
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing okay. I'm excited to talk to everybody and be a part of this. Vivian, you and I are colleagues at the podcast 99% Invisible.
Mm-hmm.
And we, I think, have met in person once or twice. But we spend hours on Zoom together every week, and it is always a delight. But I feel like you and I haven't talked all that much about, we are always talking about craft. We're always talking about making the show. But I have a ton of questions for you because I love the way you tell stories and the stuff you do. So I'm really excited to get this opportunity to talk about storycraft and making podcasts that are both fun and also rigorous and narrative. And it's really cool we get this chance. So thanks for wanting to do this.
Chris, you're the best, first of all. And second, when I first met you, I wasn't super familiar with a lot of the things that you've done. And I remember when you came to visit the office that one time, and you're like, "Oh yeah, I was working on something for 30 for 30. I did the UFC piece." I was like, "You did the UFC piece? That was one of my favorite pieces." So I'm so excited to ask you how you did.
Thank you.
Yeah, and it's so ambitious that I have a lot of questions for you. So.
Oh my gosh, that's really kind. So to set people up for this, so we are going to be doing what we're calling a story swap, where each of us has picked one piece of work from our archive, and we are going to talk about it, share a couple clips, and then talk through how we made it and how we made some of the narrative choices that we did and some of the storytelling choices. Before we get to that, Vivian, I think both of us have an interesting story to becoming podcast making people. I think yours is a lot more interesting than mine. Because you worked in TV. You worked on the Arsenio Hall show and stuff. What was your life before you got into podcasting?
So the year was 1992. Mm-hmm. I am 65 years old. And my first job, so I worked on the reboot of Arsenio Hall. I hate that that's the first line of my bio always is that
Why do you hate that?
It's just a ridiculous thing to... Anyways.
I could top you on ridiculous stuff I've worked on. I think everybody has a weird resume that involves a bunch of stuff they're not happy about. So
yeah, okay. Most, I would say usually there's some a few pieces where you're oh, I'm not so proud of that. Most of it is just for me, it's just embarrassing jobs that I've done. But yeah, so I worked in TV for most of my post-college life. And the thing about TV is that when you work on a show, you jump from show to show, and then you go with stretches of unemployment. So that's kind of how I ended up in podcasting, because I started reevaluating my life during this stretch of unemployment. And yeah, that's how I ended up in podcasts. And it's kind of funny because in any other field of work, it would be really weird to say. So I basically got into podcasting because I entered the Radiotopia PodQuest contest.
Right, yeah.
And the weird thing about podcasting is I think 30% of the people that get into podcasting did it because they entered some kind of contest, because you got Ear Hustle. I think Nancy was also a contest.
Nancy was a contest, yeah.
And I think Glenn Washington also was, he entered a contest, and that's how he got into...
Oh, that's right. He entered a public radio contest, right?
Yeah. So I'm one of those people.
I mean, in a way, it's entering a contest like that. Was that something you were afraid to do when you did it, or was it something where you're if I get this, maybe I should change careers, or were you really determined you were going to become a podcaster at that point?
So by that point, I was already thinking. I was it seems some of the skills that I have, because I worked in mostly talk show kind of producing when I was in TV. I was it seems like a lot of my skills would be transferable into podcasts. And I like them so much that maybe I should start thinking about it. So that's how I found out about the PodQuest contest too, is because I was I went to Radiotopia. I was I wonder if they're hiring associate producers. And I was oh, they're doing a contest. Oh, I'm going to enter this. So it was already a switch that I'd already been thinking about too. So it was kind of the right place, right time.
Right. Arsenio, nice guy?
Yes.
Did you ever deal with him directly?
This is going to live on the internet. So yes, he's great. Everybody's great.
Every one of my collaborators through time are terrific people. I have no problem.
Never disliked a single person I've worked for.
I do. Did you like that I did basically a I'm trying to think. There's a couple of like Larry King definitely did that where he's like, this person, nice guy. Like he'll just put you on the spot.
Yeah. Gotcha journalism right there. I see.
Yeah. Oh, that is actual gotcha journalism.
Yeah. What about you, Chris? I'm curious how you kind of jumped into this field.
Yeah, I bounced around for a long time because I did college radio and then I went to journalism school. And I was like, I'm on a rocket ride to the top. And then I had to do years of like being the morning edition host in Illinois for Illinois Public Radio. And
how did you end up in Illinois though?
That was me being like, oh yeah, I need some way to like, I was like, I'll take whatever radio job there is. And that was like the only radio job there was. So I did that. I was really not good at it. I actually didn't know. The biggest problem is that I didn't know how to convert Fahrenheit and Celsius. So I had to do the weather reports and I'd be like, it's 25 today. That seems cool because like 25 in Celsius is like a balmy nice day. And then we'd get like tons of mail and calls and people just complaining about it all the time. And like I was not, and the other thing, so Illinois Public Radio, you have to talk about all the small towns in Illinois. And I did not know all the small towns in Illinois are named after European capitals, but they're all pronounced differently as like
no.
Right. So I was like in Berlin today and in Paris, and like it's called Paris. It's Berlin. And the other one was Athens. Athens, Illinois.
See, that's mean.
I was very unpopular very quickly. So I did that, and then I moved to I was in like Sudbury. I did a bunch of stuff at the CBC in Canada. Went to Slate, worked on some documentaries for Pineapple. So like I've done years of just like different I've gotten experience in almost every different type of podcast at this point. And then last year I joined 99% Visible, which was like my absolute dream, and it means the world to me that I got there, and I know I'm going to screw it up somehow, but so far it's been going really well.
So far so good. We're all very happy to have you. So.
Well, it's lovely to be there. So Vivian, I think we should start the show. We should talk about some stories.
Okay.
What do you think? Yeah. How do you want to do this?
So first of all, we should probably say that I'm going to be talking about one of my 99 PI pieces called Goodness Gracious, Great Balls of Twine. It's a very long title. And you're going to be talking about one of my favorite pieces, which is...
That's very kind.
About UFC. And it's called...
It is called No Rules, the birth of UFC.
There we go. Yes.
I wanted to call it A History of Violence, but they would not allow me for copyright reasons to call it that.
You can't copyright a title.
You can't copyright a title, but they were worried. Well, I think they were worried people would be confused if you Googled A History of Violence and then you came up with my thing and also the Cronenberg movie, which is fair, which is very reasonable. So, yeah. Okay, so Vivian, we're going to do this one at a time, and I have a Canadian $2 coin here.
Oof.
I got a toonie. I want you to call it. Do you want it to be the queen, or do you want the polar bear?
So it's like heads or bears?
Yeah, it's heads. It's queen or bear.
Okay, let's do bear. I'm going to do bear.
Okay.
Wait. Can we assign what that means? That means if it's bear, it means me go first?
Yeah, it means you go first.
Okay.
Bear it is.
Oh,
right,
I'm
my friend.
first.
Let's do this.
Okay. All right. Okay.
So tell me, the year is 1995. No, when? Okay, this was out last year. This is a great story on 99% Visible.
Yes, this is a story produced almost exactly a year ago. Today is the 23rd, and today is the day that I flew back from Branson, Missouri, on the last leg of my reporting trip.
Whoa.
And I got married the next day.
You got married the day after you finished the Twine story?
After. Yeah.
That's incredible.
This was a whirlwind reporting trip that I fit in 4 Midwest cities in a week, and I drove the entire time. And it was a 1,200-mile long road trip because it just made sense for me to do it that way.
Well, tell me, okay, so what was the plan of this road trip? So you were like, a lot of the question people always ask is like, how do you come up with stories? And like, this story is like, you wanted to see all the things that claim to be the biggest ball of twine in America. Like, is that the story, or like, what was the genesis of it?
So the way that the story came to me is basically the day that I told one of my friends His name's Andrew Zilch, good guy. I told him I got a job at 99PI making podcasts, and he said, "Have you heard of the biggest ball of twine competition?" And I said, "No, tell me more," because he happened to live basically next door to one of the giant balls of twine. So that's how I found this story, is through my friend pitching it to me before I even started working on the show. So the story itself, there's not really a story. 4 men in 4 different Midwest towns have all claimed to have rolled the biggest ball of twine. But the thing is, they all think that theirs is the biggest, and they're all using different units of measurement for what they consider the biggest. So big is an incredibly broad term. So there is one man who thinks that, because he rolled it himself, it's the biggest, because it's the biggest and also rolled by one man. There's one that's like rolled by a bunch of people and it's also the heaviest. There's one that is the widest in circumference. And then there's another man who has the heaviest ball of twine.
I love this. I loved everything about this story.
Yeah. And so I wanted to play something for you real fast, because so you know how it goes when we are like basically editing a story. We edit the scripts. Roman has his lines. He records them all in one track. We record all our lines, and then we cut it together. So this is one of my favorite pieces of tape, not in the piece. And it's just an outtake of Roman recording his tracks and what his feelings are about the story. So this is tell me if you could hear this.
This is a ridiculous story.
So that's what Roman thought.
Okay. Wait, this is the thing. Like, when you're pitching a story to 99% Invisible, like, you've got to pitch a good story. Like, it's a big successful show. Mm-hmm. When you were thinking, okay, I want to do a story about the contest for the biggest ball of twine in America. Mm-hmm. Like, how did you decide, how did you pitch it in a way that was attractive to the show? Like, how did you pitch it in a way that was felt like a story that had stakes and had something bigger that was happening in the story thematically?
That's a good question. I'm not entirely sure. So I sat on this story I didn't pitch it for a year, because I had it before I even started. I had this story and I was like, I really want to do it. It's really out there and I'm not exactly sure what direction I'm going to take it or what the ending of this is going to be. And I think when I did pitch it, the reason why it did get greenlit is because it's so absurd. There are very, very distinct characters in it. And there's 4 of them. And it's just, just hearing about these specific people would be interesting enough, even if you're not exactly sure where the story's going to go. So, I mean, it was a character piece. And so it was just kind of something different that I think the show was interested in doing.
Let's walk through it a little bit.
Okay.
So you have this idea. You're like, I want to talk about this contest. I want to talk about these people. How do you start reporting that? Like, how do you come up with the structure for how you're going to do a story that doesn't have an obvious structure?
Good question. So my style tends to be a little bit more loosey-goosey. So I found who my characters were. I found who I was going to talk to, and I kind of stitched the story together after the fact, which I do not recommend for anybody.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Because the writing process was really, really tough. And Emmett Fitzgerald, who is one of the producers on staff, he was my editor, and he was really, really good at, basically helping me thread these little pieces together. So the structure of the story is I basically attack it one ball at a time. So I start with the first person who rolled the ball. And I basically introduce the characters one by one, because this is a story with pretty much 0 stakes. And so in order to create the tension and the stakes, I would introduce another character to kind of upset the timeline, if that makes sense. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it does. It does. So in this case, it's I get I think the advice some people give is when you're not sure what to do with the story, put it in order chronologically. Yes. That's the move, is just tell the story from front to finish. But there's no obvious front to finish story here. Mm-hmm. So for you, it was I'm going to go and start doing this reporting, and maybe that could be kind of like a spine of it, or like the iterations through the years of the Balls of Twine could be the spine of it.
Yeah, so my fallback was to keep it as chronological as possible, because there wasn't a ton of tension, but there was some tension. And so this is, a lot of stories have like a 3-act structure, beginning, like climax, end. This is a weird story that has kind of a 4-act structure, just because there are 4 different characters with 4 different introductions of twine balls. So I actually have, let me pull this up for you. This, can you see this actually? Can you see
this? This is, whoa, oh my God. Okay, so what is this?
This, I spoke, one of the people that I spoke with, his name's Doug Kirby, and he runs this website called Roadside America. And so this is, the Twine Balls was kind of a passion project for him. Like he wanted to see all of them. He found like their stories really, really interesting. And so he drew out this timeline of the 4 different balls. So these 2 guys, if there was any tension, it was going to be between these 2 guys, Francis Johnson and Frank Stober, because they started at about the same time, and they kept kind of overtaking each other for the record of the biggest ball of twine. And then this guy right here, J.C. Payne, he comes in more towards the end to kind of like upset everything. And he would be the natural ending point for the story. Because if you listen to the story, it's basically these 2 old bastards battling it out for the biggest ball of twine. And then all of a sudden this guy comes in at the end, and he just all of a sudden has the biggest ball of twine. But then I got this guy over here, Frank Kotera, who goes by JFK. And he was kind of an outlier in the story. And so what I basically did, I could actually play a clip, but what I actually did in the piece is I set it up as if it were a 3-act structure, with Francis Johnson, Frank Stober, and then J.C. Payne, and then did a fake out ending and introduced the last character. And then basically the story is nothing matters. So let me play that clip real fast. Hold on. Can you, I'm not sharing screen anymore, right?
You're not sharing screen. I think you do have to hit the share screen to do that.
All right. So this is, I know I'm jumping like all the way to the end when I just started. Apologize for that. So this is basically the turning point towards the very end of the story. So I'm basically wrapping up the story of these 3 guys all have the biggest ball of twine in their own right. And all of a sudden this other guy comes in out of left field, and nothing matters.
Each town has the largest twine ball, depending on what you mean by that. Darwin's is the largest twine ball rolled by one man. Cocker City's is the largest ball of sisal twine. And J.C. Payne's is the largest nylon string ball. It's a 3-way truce. Except, hi, JFK? Hi. Is it okay if we come over? This is very impressive.
This is the biggest ball of twine in the world.
Of course it is.
Each town has...
So basically, Emmett and I kind of came up with that ending because there's no way of escaping the fact that we had a complete story and there's like a wrench got thrown into it. So we kind of leaned into the humor of it.
Right.
Because why not? Yeah.
It is something I really like about that is also that in a way, like I try to think in 3-act structures, and I try to write that way. And I think a lot of people do with narrative podcasts, but it's fun to have something where it just gets more complicated. I think people love going along for that ride. I think people, like in documentaries, I think people love the like extra weird, complicating detail that makes it hard to fit it into like a really classic kind of narrative structure and a classic understanding of a story.
Yeah, and that's like one of the challenges when you're working on a piece, just in general, is kind of knowing where the line is of how complicated is too complicated, and
right.
whether you could trust a listener to be able to sort out those details. But yeah, I think it kind of worked in this case. It doesn't always work, but I got kind of lucky. It's kind of my reporting style. I got kind of lucky.
I wonder, when you're approaching a story like this is obviously I know people would not call this like a high stakes story with like big, with big consequences at the end. How do you approach it both in a way that you're like clearly having fun with it and telling a fun story, but also taking the people seriously? Because if you're making the biggest ball of twine, like you obviously are like care about it. It's, your life work in some case. Like, how do you take it seriously while also appreciating like this is a funny story that I'm out for fun to tell the story?
Yeah, so the story in itself it's very low stakes. It's very silly. The silliness is kind of just naturally there already, just given,
through giant balls of twine.
Exactly. But like when I'm reporting something just generally, like whether I'm reporting like a really silly story or a story that has to do with like other cultures and stuff, I try my best to be like empathetic because, and the important thing is that you talk to people who actually care about this kind of thing. Because if they care about it, the way that they tell you about it, the way that they tell you their story, it'll make you care about it. So actually, I think I have a clip. 1 second. So actually, like in a story like this about the biggest ball of twine, it's very easy to think that, maybe it's just like a bunch of Midwest rubes that have nothing better, to do.
And to build a giant ball of twine. Yeah.
Yeah. But the people in the story, they're in on the joke. Like they know exactly, they know how silly it is. And so one person that I did talk to, let me see here. Her name was Linda Clover, and she was the caretaker of the second largest ball of twine in Cawker City, Kansas.
I love the person who is still so passionate about it that they're like, I don't care if it's the second biggest ball of twine. It's still my ball of twine. It's still, yeah.
So let me play this real fast. So she was a very sweet lady, but she kind of played into it because it's kind of good for them to have this really silly thing that people want to come and visit because it's silly. Yeah. So
if you go to my car or my pickup truck, either one has twine that I have ready to let people add twine onto the ball. Now, no one else in town carries twine with them, but Linda Clover does.
So you could basically tell that she's in on the joke.
Right.
And I try not to make fun of anybody. I mean, if you're a naturally ridiculous person, it's going to come out, within the story. So our show in general is not a mean-spirited show. And so I just let people speak for themselves. But there's one thing that I did, you can't see me, right? Okay, it's just my screen.
I think we can see you in the corner of the screen, Vivian.
Okay. So one thing that I had to keep in though, because it was so ridiculous, but it was also just so funny. I don't think it was intentionally funny. It was this one clip of the mayor of Darwin. And I was asking him about something that they have called Darwin Twine Ball Day, where they celebrate their enormous twine ball and they have a parade and they have a 5K that they call a Twine K. But yeah, this is just one of my favorite clips.
It starts out with a 17,400 foot run. That's a 17,400 foot run to celebrate a 17,400 pound twine ball.
They pass out candy to kids, roll miniature versions of the twine ball down the street, and have a parade.
It probably lasts around 35 minutes, which is the right length for a parade these days, in my opinion.
So, I don't think he meant to do that, the little 35-minute thing at the end, but it's like one of my favorite pieces of tape I've ever gotten. So that's the only time that I kind of made fun of someone a little bit. But yeah, it's just about trying to be an empathetic reporter as much as possible.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And trying to approach a story like this with love as opposed to condescension, which is I think what can happen when a lot of people come into a situation that they think is silly. Mm-hmm. In terms of just in terms of the reporting process. So you go, you do the road trip, mm-hmm. you gather tape at every place and you come back and then you get married and then you sit down to write the whole story. What do you do when you get home and you sit down to write that story? What's the first thing you do with all that tape to make it make sense?
So, I mean, everybody probably has to do, well, we're lucky because we have Trent and we have the transcription service. So what I'll do is I'll just go through and I'll listen to every piece of tape and then I'll just make my highlights as I go. I'll pull the clips. And then when I have a 27-page document of just my favorite selects. I'll start going through there, and I'll try to like shape what the story is going to look like given what my tape looks like. So I mostly build around like the good pieces of tape that I have, which is I think what a lot of people do. And so this was like a weird balance of trying to tell the story and also kind of insert myself as the reporter, because I framed this as like a road trip piece, which is not something we usually do at 99PI. Usually the reporter is a little bit like, they're there, but they're not there as a character. But we figured that I kind of had to insert myself because I was already going on this long road trip. And how do you not talk about me being on a road trip when I'm driving 1,200 miles from like Wisconsin to Branson, Missouri?
Yeah. We have a couple of questions in the chat. I see one of which is, Viv, have you ever started your own twine ball? From Helen Saltzman.
Ooh. I have one that's about this big, made from twine from like Amazon packages.
This is something that like, it seems like it's actually really difficult to build a twine ball that big. Like, just, I don't understand how it stays together structurally without falling apart.
Yeah, it's just, I don't really know, but it's a talent. It's clearly a talent.
In terms of like, so when you're making yourself, because I feel like this is a thing to, this is a way when you're making a story and you're not sure how to structure it, is to make it about your journey as a reporter, like going through it and finding all the facts. Like you make it an investigation or a mystery. And I think that's a really popular way to tell stories. And there's a reason, because it's like your discovery is the audience discovery.
Like you need some kind of through line at least, because this was like 4 different stories operating independently. So I think I kind of used myself to thread the through line through the piece, which I didn't like do like a crazy amount of or anything, but a little bit of connection.
Totally. Yeah. That's something I always am worried about, is putting myself too much in the story. And it's something that I feel like you don't do here, while still making it like your journey is kind of the story that you're telling.
Yeah. Like 99PI is, I think Roman said it's kind of like a book report kind of podcast, which I felt like it was very fitting. And so it's hard to really insert yourself in. So it's a delicate line of balance. Like, how much do people really want to hear you, and how much do they want to like learn and be a part of this journey?
Totally. So in terms of like the landing, like the very end of the twine ball piece. So the story is, you go to the various twine balls, and then it's like JFK comes in and he's found a new way to do twine, basically.
Yeah.
I always find endings really, really hard.
Yes.
Like, how do you come up with an ending for a story like this? Like, how do you find like that last piece of tape that you think is like the most fitting thing to close on?
That's a good question. So this one, I came into the story not wanting to make any kind of like value judgments on like what actually was the biggest ball of twine, because I didn't feel like that was my place. Because it's kind of like choosing your favorite twine ball is kind of like a horoscope. It like tells you something about yourself, I guess. And so you could just determine what your favorite is, whatever. And so I kind of wanted to remove myself from the equation and kind of just let the story live in this nebulous area. And I think that the ending tape that I have is, it just goes out with JFK, like him just talking about how it doesn't matter to him what anybody else thinks. Like, he doesn't want the Guinness Book of World Records to measure his ball. He's just doing it for himself. And I feel like that was the really good takeaway from this piece, is that it doesn't really matter as long as you're just doing it for yourself. And so I thought that was like a nice, peaceful, meditative way to like take the piece out. Also, I had no other ideas. So
I know exactly what you mean. That thing where you hit the end and you're like, I think it is a really lovely piece of tape that you end on, but it's also something where, for me in the past, sometimes I have hit the end of a story and just been like talked myself into the piece of tape being really profound, and then listening back on it being like, oh no, that's just like the only thing I had.
Yes. Yeah. I would say 9 times out of 10, it's because that was the only thing that I had. I hope people are learning a lot from this.
When you went to talk to the twine ball people, were they really into the fact you were talking to them, or were they suspicious of you coming in as an outsider?
Everybody was very open to talking to me. So the good thing about doing a piece like this is that, a lot of these towns kind of rely on the tourism from like their giant twine ball, as kind of silly as that seems. So they like Linda Clover, who was the caretaker of the, Cocker City, Kansas Twine Ball. She was absolutely lovely. And she's like the town booster. So everybody they talked to is kind of like the town booster. So they were very open. The problem was when I was talking to everybody is that, so everybody in the Midwest is incredibly nice, which is a good thing, but also it makes it hard to create tension. So you would think that a story about 4 competing twine balls would have some sort of competition factor. There was not, because everybody had like a nice thing to say about
the other twine balls.
Yeah. So I was like, well, what am I supposed to do with this? So that was one of my big challenges. So like, I have another clip here. Actually, I'll just play real fast. Okay. So people from the Midwest are very nice, especially the people in this story. And so you kind of had to read between the lines of when someone was trying to be a little bit sassy. And so I have this other clip of Linda Clover, and she's basically comparing. We're talking about the comparison of her twine ball to another twine ball, and they use a different type of twine. And so you could kind of hear, you could read between the lines and just hear in her voice, in her very, very sweet voice, that she does not care for this other twine ball.
Part of it was that he, used whatever he could get in terms of string, nylon specifically.
Which bothered a lot of twine ball purists who like to think of twine in the more traditional, more natural sense.
I've seen the pile of plastic.
Here's Linda Clover from Cocker City again.
They're we're talking apples and oranges, something completely different.
And that was like the closest I ever got her to talking shit on anything.
I mean, you can hear it. She calls it a pile of plastic. Like she's the one who's like. We have a question here, which is, what was the best twine you saw? How much did you use as wedding favors the following day? Were you rolled down the aisle? Did you roll a ball of twine ahead of you and then you followed it up to the altar?
I was inside a ball of twine and it was unraveled on the way. And then by the time it unspooled, I popped out like that. But what was the first part of my question?
What was the best twine you saw? Yeah, I mean, did you come away like, I think we're going to talk about this with the Ultimate Fighting Championship too, because it's not something I cared about before I started doing the story. Like, did you get really into it when you started looking into twine and like making giant balls of twine? Like, did you become someone who really cares about the details of it?
I didn't really care about the detail. I mean, I did have a favorite ball of twine for sure. But I can't say that like I cared too much about twine itself, but I did come out of it with a new appreciation for, I guess, like the small town culture and like the things that are important to smaller towns and the things that make them special, I guess. So whether or not it's like a twine ball or like the world's largest like duck, like fiberglass duck, or if it's like a frying pan that they have, like I have an appreciation for that. Like people trying to make something out of very little and using it to feel special, I guess.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I feel like there's some process that in the type of reporting that we do, which is like, if you're doing really hard-hitting reporting, like sometimes this is not the case, but if it's a story that is the type that would run 99% visible, like you kind of have to fall in love a little bit with the subject or like the creator or something. You have to find some way in as a reporter that makes you super interested to find all those little details that like help the story live and be vibrant. And for me with the Ultimate Fighting Championship, that was a really hard thing because it's like, how do I like, I don't like the sport. Like, how do I get into the sport in a way that I will then feel compelled to like spend 3 months digging into every detail of it? And like with Twine too, you had to find like the thing that really made you passionate about the story you were telling. And for you, it was like the small towns you're saying.
Mm-hmm. And that's actually a good pivot point because I would love to ask you about the UFC
Totally.
piece.
Okay.
Yeah. Do you want to give like a synopsis about it, by the way?
Oh, totally. Okay. So for mine, the story that I worked on, I'm actually going to pull up my keynote address here. So
cool.
Here we are. Yeah, I made a whole slideshow. I'm ready for this. So the story, this was for 30 for 30, which is the podcast that is telling stories about sports. And I was brought in to work on the story about the Ultimate Fighting Championship, the very first one. So the thing with the UFC is that now it's one of the biggest sports in the world. It's one of the most watched sports in the world. But it only like started in the 90s. And when it started, the whole idea behind it is one guy was like, it'd be cool if like a boxer fought a wrestler. Like it's the kind of conversation you hear people have at a bar where they're like, who's the toughest guy? Like would Michael Jordan beat LeBron James if they were both alive today, whatever.
It's the tiger versus shark thing.
It's the tiger versus shark thing. And this guy was like, well, what if I actually did it? Like what's stopping us? So the guy is named Art Davey.
Is that him?
This is him. This is his book that he wrote called Is This Legal? ? The inside story of the first UFC by the man who created it. So in some ways, like when I came into this story, it was like, I mean, and as you see, the quote at the top is, this would make a great movie. John Milius, Academy Award nominated screenwriter and director of Conan the Barbarian. And when I came in, it was like, yeah.
Academy Award nominated screenwriter and director of Conan the Barbarian.
Those are separate credits. So one credit is Academy Award nominated screenwriter, ampersand, director of Conan the Barbarian.
Gotcha.
So it's something where like when I came into the story, I'm like, well, in some ways, like this is a really easy job for me because this guy has already written this book. Like there's already kind of a structure and an outline that I can follow here. The story was told in some form, even though it is like, again, one guy's version of events. The commish himself, Art Davey, the writer of Is This Legal? The inside story of the first UFC from the man who created it. And hold on one second. And Art, the guy himself, was like such a great talker that I thought this was going to be the easiest thing in the world. So here's like Art talking about his time before the UFC.
Are you playing a clip right now, Chris? Because I think you need
I
to
am
share
playing
some.
it, but it didn't work. I'm sorry, everybody. I think we just had that's my fault. I just forgot to share the audio. So I'm just going to quickly do that screen share again. While I'm getting the screen share set back up. Okay, I see. I did exactly the mistake that I said we shouldn't do yesterday when we were practicing this. So Art Davey is just this incredible talker. He's a great self-mythologizer too. He's somebody who, when he tells you his life story, he tells it in like almost a cinematic way. So I was like, this is going to be the easiest job in the world. So here, like, this is just him talking.
My job always was to come up with something and say, you know something, this is going to be big.
But Art wasn't just selling cars. He was also selling himself.
I did all my own stunts, jumped off a 10-story building, got shot with a .357 Magnum, got set on fire for my commercials.
Hurtling 25 feet through the air is a very big risk. You would not do it. Why take the same risk when you buy a new car?
So I was a guy that knew how to get shit done.
So after talking to him the first time and he said that, I'm like, oh yeah, this is going to be easy. Piece of cake, nothing to worry about. And also Horion Gracie, who is like the jiu-jitsu guy who we brought in to found the UFC with him. He's like, I need a fighter to bring in some, like, we got to work together. And Horion is also, this guy is incredible at just like telling his own story. So here's him from our interview.
My father was the first sports icon in the history of Brazil. My dad, the number one ever, very famous.
I think Pelé would argue against him being the number one sports icon in the history of Brazil.
Maybe,
but it's still
Neymar would have
Neymar. a few people would take issue, but it's something where, like, after doing these interviews, it's like, this is going to be a piece of cake. There's a clear 3-act structure to the story, which is Art has this idea. Let's just get all the biggest, toughest guys in the world to fight each other. He teams up with Horion. They recruit a bunch of fighters. They don't get the best ones, but they get this fun, like, kind of dirty dozen ragtag team of fighters together. They get a TV deal. They're like, let's do this. Act 2 is the fight. They bring all these weird guys to Denver. There's a very tense meeting where they almost start fighting each other, like, before the main event. The tournament itself is like this huge mess. The fights are all 45 seconds. They have to call 4 ambulances. And then the twist at the end of Act 2 is an unexpected person wins. Somebody you don't think is going to win takes it. Then Act 3 is, how it then became this huge cultural phenomenon, which is it's a huge mess, but people love it. The sport takes off. Art and Horion have to bail when John McCain and other politicians start putting big pressure on it, and they think it's going to be outlawed. And then the sport becomes huge without them. Like, they take a buyout and they leave, and then it goes on to huge success after these guys are gone. So I'm like, easy, great, easy story, no problems whatsoever. So because I was working with ESPN for this story, and I got to say, I was working with a great producer at ESPN named Andrew Mambo, who did a lot of work on this. Jessica Hackle, who's a great producer at Pineapple Street. She and I worked on all this stuff together. Joel Lovell, who's an editor there. So there's like tons of people who were involved. This was not all me, but they asked me to write up a treatment. So I did. I wrote up basically like what would be like a treatment for a movie, where it's like after I'd done the first couple of interviews. So it's like, okay, here's how it's going to look. Here are all the scenes. Here are all the twists. Here's the archival footage I'm going to need. And very quickly, I realized I had a huge storytelling problem, which was assembling the team, because they have to get the 8 fighters together for the tournament, which is the sudden introduction of 8 different characters.
Yes.
And with them and the founders and also Art Davies' girlfriend at the time and like all these other people, that's like 11 or 12 speaking characters in a 45-minute story, which is really like death in podcasts. So I was trying to figure out like, what am I going to do in this situation? And the way I approached it was to basically just steal from another thing that did this kind of, that took on the storytelling problem and did it really well. And the first one that came to mind for me was Ocean's 11. So I'm like, what's another story that has tons of characters, that introduces them, that they're all very distinct. And I watched Ocean's 11 again and was reminded that there's a great scene in Ocean's 11 when they get the team together. You all know this scene in a heist movie where it's like, we need a dynamite person. We need somebody who's going to be the distraction, you know.
So Asian guy in a box.
Yeah. So this is the scene from Ocean's 11.
All right, who's in? Frank C is in. Frank C has developed a bad case of bronchitis and is putting in for a transfer to warmer climates.
So basically, it's just each character gets like a rapid lightning, like, this guy's in. This is this guy's deal. Here's how he works. And I more or less lifted that directly for the UFC piece. So here's what that sounded like when I tried to do it.
So Rozier's in. Then Art calls up a guy who knows a lot about sumo in Japan. And that guy, he has a tip about a Hawaiian wrestler living in Japan named Taylor Tooley.
He's a real thorny problem. He said, got kicked out of sumo. I said, how high did he get in sumo? He said, Makoshita. I said, that's right below the top level. He said, yeah, the guy's good. He said, he's 6'2", weighs about 420. He said he actually pushed a Japanese reporter into a plate glass window, and the glass broke, and he said it was an accident, and he's no longer fighting professionally in Japan.
So it's something where doing that, like when you, you know, when I was trying to do this, it's like, okay, I will try to like pattern it off the Ocean's 11 thing where, you know, you hear each fighter is introduced, you get a little detail about them that gives you everything you need to know about them going forward. So like, there's the sumo wrestler threw a guy through a plate glass window. There's this American fighter named Ken Shamrock who looks like Captain America. So throughout the piece, we would keep saying, oh, it's Captain America, Ken Shamrock. Like we would use that phrase as a way to like remind everybody. So there's one guy who is Stevie Wonder's bodyguard. And we're like, yeah, that guy's Stevie Wonder's bodyguard. We just have like some identifying detail, like a little shingle you can hang on each character when you bring them back.
I'm actually curious, when you decided to include the identifier every time you went back to that character, was that something that came about because in another edit it was a little bit more confusing, or was that something that you had thought of ahead of time as you were scripting?
That's something in scripting I thought would be valuable, because unlike, you know, the movie Ocean's 11, it's like, oh, we introduce all these people. They're famous people and you know a thing about them, right? And it's like, we don't have that here. So it was like, we need some identifying detail. And I tried as much as possible to make the identifying detail something that's like personality and character based, as opposed to like, I mean, Captain America, it's like, okay, that is how he looks. And like, you'll see in the next slide.
So
this guy, he's the guy on the right. At the time he was like, he's like, basically he's jacked. He's Captain America. So I tried to make it like as much as possible, you know, Stevie Wonder's bodyguard is a job, obviously, but in many cases it's like, okay, we've got this other guy who you see on the left in this photo, who is the like Gracie, who they actually submitted for the competition, and it was like, yeah, okay, so he is like, he's somebody who has a chip on his shoulder. He's kind of an underdog, and he has this underdog mentality because everyone underestimates him. So trying to find like a character thing to do it every time. But yeah, like having that little shingle was a way to be like, remember this guy who we told you about earlier, who has this like distinct, interesting voice? Like, this is the guy. But it is something like the bigger thing that I took away from this that I've tried to apply to like a lot of what I do now is when you hit a story problem, when you hit something where it's like, how do I explain this? This is too confusing. Is like, look to other pieces of art or other pieces of media that encountered the same problem and try to see what you could learn from that and take from that and apply somewhere else. So the second problem I came into really quickly was that obviously Art, the main guy, and Horion are extremely big talkers and they talk in stories, which is like kind of a incredible gift, like that they can sort of tell the story for you. The bigger issue that I came across is that a lot of these other guys really were not that. So like Ken Shamrock, the guy on the right, he is a character who, when we came to his house, like we drove out to his house in the middle of nowhere in Nevada, and we're like, hey, so like, what was it like in that fight? He's like, it was crazy, man. And then that was it. And we're just like, oh God, like we're not going to get anything. Like we're not going to get anything from this guy. So eventually we just started playing him the fights. And after we played him the first time, he was like, wow, it's crazy watching that. We're like, let's watch it again. And we asked him to kind of like try to speak like a sports commentator. So here is him when he's watching the fight for the second time. And slowly what we realized is that he was like reliving it as he was watching it the second time.
Hoist trips up Ken and he gets on top. Ken starts trying to pry himself loose, but he just can't pull himself out.
As I'm trying to push his feet away, I can't get that grip. Now with shoes on, I can get it. So now we end up on the bottom, and this is where he's good at, on top.
Over, and now Hoist has him in what appears to be the guard position. Hoist takes the mount. That's exactly where Hoist wants to be. Now what Hoist is probably going to try to do is get his right leg, his left leg over Ken's.
Hoist starts positioning Ken for the...
So you get the picture. Like as soon as we started, you introduced that visual element and put him back in there, he started giving us that tape that we wanted, which is like story tape where he's in the middle of it and he's reliving it. That's something that worked for some people. It did not work for Hoist, who was the other guy in that fight, who you see right here, who was like the unexpected champion of the first UFC. Like I had to send a tape syncer out to him, and the tape syncer showed him video, and Hoist was like, huh, yeah, I've seen this a lot. Like he just was not engaging with it at all.
Yeah.
And once I got to this point, I was like really struggling to come up with ideas. So one of the things we did was basically like play a word game together. So I'd be like, okay, so start this sentence with, what happens at the end of the fight is he won the fight and he got to go to Disneyland. And I was like, how was Disneyland? He's like, cool. I'm like, not helpful. So I'm like, start a sentence with like, Disneyland is cool because, like, trying to just like playing all these word games to try to get him into it. So this is how that one turned out.
Here he is, the ultimate fighting champion, validated in front of his entire family. But in this moment, he's still Hoist.
What are you going to do with the money? I'm going to go to Disneyland. You going to Disneyland? There's a promo for him. Okay.
Disneyland is fun because you become a kid again.
A special day for you.
I love that piece of tape because we got so much reaction from people being like, wow, this legend of UFC just said Disneyland is fun because you become a kid again. Like people just, when you give little sentence prompts like that, like I try not to do that very often, but sometimes I do. And like people come up with really fun and creative and interesting and telling reactions. I did not realize this is something that The Bachelor does all the time. That makes me feel really bad about this technique, is that they will say like, I love Colton because, and the person who at this point is probably like sleep deprived and has had 3 glasses of wine is like, I love Colton because he's the most handsome in the world. Like it's a thing that that can be a little iffy, but like I like trying to come up with these new ways to do prompts is something that I had to learn doing the story, because so many of the talkers were not naturally storytellers. They were not people who would go back and be like, this is the room and this is what it was like. And one issue that I had over and over again was that the story was already 25 years old by the time I was getting to it. So all of the people who were telling the story either had like kind of shaky memories of it, or they did that thing where they've told the story so many times, you know, it's become its own thing. Like they don't really remember what happened. And one of the people in the story is Kathy Kidd, who ended up becoming Art Davies' husband, who worked on the first UFC. And a scene that I knew we needed was the scene where the fighters are all sitting down. They're about to be told the rules of the UFC. And a brawl almost breaks out. And the whole thing almost falls apart. And when I was talking to Kathy, I'm like, what was the room like? Like I was trying to get a picture for people of like, what's it like with all these fighters in the room? And she's like, well, it was like a hotel conference room. You know, it was a pretty boring place. And I'm like, what did the hotel conference room look like? She's like, I don't know. So we started Googling around and we found the hotel in Denver where the thing happened. And I was like, we were just looking through their website and looking at the place where it's like, hold your conference at our hotel. And we were looking through different conference rooms and eventually we stumbled on this one. And she's like, yeah, that's it. And then as soon as she saw the conference room, she started in her head doing this thing of like, okay, so we're in this room and this happened and this happened. And then she started like picturing it and putting herself back there. And this is what that tape ended up sounding like.
It's time for the fighters to see each other in person. This has never happened before, so they need to have a meeting to go over the rules. But UFC supposedly has no rules, so it promises to be a pretty short meeting. Still, there's tension in the air. It's 8 fighters in a tiny hotel conference room, together for the first time. Here's Kathy Kidd. She worked on logistics for UFC 1.
It was like a classroom style setup with a whole bunch of overgrown kids, adults squeezed into these little chairs that were mostly too small for most of them. They were kind of close together after we've been keeping them apart for so long. Now they're all crammed in this one little room, all next to each other. So something was bound to happen.
So through that, I ended up getting like the kind of tape that you want when you bring people to a place where the thing happens. Like I love doing that when it's possible. In this case, I couldn't take this person who was working in Nevada and fly her out to Denver and like go to the conference room together. So just trying to find like little hacks for that is something I had to get creative about making the story.
I'm actually curious.
Yeah.
So the thing about like UFC is that there's all this footage and stuff. Have you ever had to deal with like bad talkers and get them to paint a picture where you don't have like video reference or like imagery that you can show them in order to get them to open up?
Yeah, it's really tricky. I mean, something that I've taken this approach in so many other stories where like I've really tried to take a visual approach now in almost all my stories. So like I did some interviews for a story last week and like asked the person in advance, could you try to find photos from the time? Mm-hmm. Could you show me those photos? And then like I try to just use visual prompts as much as possible now, which I know doesn't work for every story and doesn't work for every person, but like that's something that I find really useful. Yeah, I mean, especially on like, I don't do stories that are from like distant past history, right? Like stories where it's like, this thing happened before any of the participants in the story were alive, I'm sure that would make it much more difficult, but yeah, I mean, with UFC, it was a blessing that we like had the tape to play to people and you could get people to respond to it and play off it. And in some cases, again, like we could, in a way it was working to find the hotel conference room. It's like I and Kathy were like doing this together. Like we're trying to solve a problem together. And sometimes when you can do that with somebody in the story, like that is a really cool and exciting thing you can do. I'm sorry, I've been watching the presentation. I have not been watching the comments on YouTube. So I'll take a look and see.
Everybody's delighted by you.
That's very sweet. That's very nice. Some people, Joe Rogan has come up in the thing. Yeah. So Joe Rogan is actually who ESPN originally wanted to be the narrator of the story.
Really?
Yeah. I was the third choice. So the first two choices were Joe Rogan and Anthony Kiedis
of
the Red Hot Chili Peppers.
Wait, can you please tell me that like ESPN came up? They had a list with 3 people on it, like Joe Rogan, Anthony Kiedis, and Chris Berube.
It was actually something where what ended up happening was that we reached out to Joe Rogan. We like sent an email and we got like his person on the phone and they were just like, we can't do this because like he's involved with the UFC and like he doesn't have time and so on and so on. And we're like, okay, totally cool. And then they're like, okay, well, try to get another famous person. What about Anthony Kiedis from the Red Hot Chili Peppers? We're like, cool. Why? And they're like, oh, he saw this event. We think he saw the first one. So I did send out an email to, I think it was like, I like just sent one out to like Red Hot Chili Peppers at rhcp.com or whatever. And I was kind of like, this isn't happening. And then in the background, we were also kind of like, it'd be kind of like better if the person who did the reporting told the story. Yeah. So like we kept telling ESPN like, well, we're waiting to hear back on Kiedis. And then like with a few weeks before it had to come out, we were like, I guess we got it. Sorry, dude. Like we really thought we had a shot with Kiedis. We got to go with Chris. And credit to ESPN that they were just like, let's let Chris do it. Yeah, Joe Rogan, Anthony Kiedis, and I are often on a list of people you want for a lot of different tasks. We're often finalists for things, so I'm pretty used to it at this point. In terms of
that's actually when before you got hired at 99PI, Roman came to us with a list. He's like, so we got Joe Rogan, we got Anthony Kiedis.
Next producer of the show. Rogan doesn't want to do it because he's obviously a multimillionaire who's got his own thing going on.
We got Berube.
So I mean, something that was like really difficult with like doing this story for me was like not having a way into like UFC is a thing, because like my dad liked it. That was like my one connection to it, was that I saw my dad be really passionate about it.
Mm-hmm.
And other than that, like, so I had like very cursory knowledge of who was who in UFC.
Mm-hmm.
But like coming into the story, it was also like, I don't know how to make this something that I care about. So I had to find these alternate routes in. And the way to do that was like when I was talking to these people and getting, or like a question I kept asking over and over again is like the obvious one. It's just like, why did you want to do this? Why did you want to like go to Denver, Colorado and just fight a dude in a cage with no rules?
Mm-hmm.
And hearing each of their reasons and like their passion for it, like everyone who wanted to do it because they had something. They were just like, okay, this, like, there was a Dutch fighter that we talked to who explained it really succinctly. What he said was like, look, I'm a fighter. This is what I do. The guy's name is Gerard Jordo. And he's like, this is what you do. You go places and you fight people. And he's like, this is what I have found like my passion and, you know, in this world. And it's like, that was the thing that I kind of latched onto, was like, oh, okay, this guy, like, for each of these people, this is the thing in their life that kind of gives them a mission and direction. And that's what is like the thing that got me actually involved in it and caring about it, even though it's something that, like, coming into it, I was like really not a fan of it at all as a sport. It was just hearing these people who went on this journey and became so enamored with it. Like, that's what got me into it.
Is your dad finally proud of you now?
I'd hope he would be. Yeah.
So that you could share this love of UFC.
Are there questions in YouTube that people would like to ask about either Vivian's piece or my piece, what we do at 99% Invisible, the type of stories? Yeah. How do the connections between the two? I see someone saying Viv also had to wait for Anthony Kiedis to turn her down so she could do the Great Balls of Twine story.
Exactly,
yes,
yeah.
Obviously.
Yes.
I think it's Vivian. This is like a thing that comes up in 99PI all the time and comes up for both you and me, I think, is like telling stories that have a lot of really complicated technical details and like trying to find a way to tell those stories in a way that was like, doesn't oversimplify the story, but also doesn't bore people with like a long list of complicated technical details. Do you have any tricks for how to handle that?
I include everything, and then I have Emmett take out everything that weighs down the story. Because I think I'm one of those people that thinks everything is interesting and everything is necessary, which is why I'm like a big fan of your story too, because this UFC story has a billion things happening. There's like 15 characters. There is like a turning point, like every like 3 minutes, something new is happening, but it doesn't feel weighed down by events and people and new introductions. So like that's very, very clear and very concise storytelling to be able to get all that stuff into one thing. So kudos.
Well, thank you. And I feel that way about your stuff as well. You tell a lot of really good history stories. Like you had an amazing story last year that I got to work on you with and edit a little bit, and I felt really lucky I got to do that.
Oh, the Great
Bitter Lake Association, which like it involved like so much history and so many years, and like watching how you just like not reduce it down, but like find the things that are core to the story is like really interesting. And I think that's a really good example for anyone who wants to like hear a history story that takes place over a long period of time.
That story was really hard because there were so many interesting little historical tidbits, and you could have put like a ton of stuff got left on the cutting room floor, but we kept in everything that had an emotional impact, and everything that you needed to know, basically, not flood people with all these details, because trivia is great, but it's not an entire story, like a story full of trivia. So
I'm seeing in the chat a question. Chris, describe the faces of the UFC champs upon laying eyes on you for the first time. Often confused. And actually, that kind of worked to my benefit a little bit, because none of them, when they figured out I'd done research and knew what I was talking about, they got really nice. But at first, I think all of them were like, who is this guy? And like, they were just really nice to me and spoken really simple. They were just like, okay, so here's how the UFC works. Like just really basic stuff. And that underestimation actually worked really well.
That's actually something that is really interesting, because I wonder when I'm coming in to an interview, how stupid should I play in order to get them to talk to me, like as if like because
I don't simplify it, but yeah, you kind of have to, yeah.
Because like I look super young, I'm a female, and so I'm like I don't want them to talk down to me, but also it makes for a better, like the story's presented better when they do talk down to you, when they
totally.
like underestimate you. So yeah, it's a weird dance to play.
I see one here from Lily. Thank you very much, Lily. How much research and prep do either of you find necessary to determine if a good story is there? That's a really good question.
That's a really good question.
I try to talk to a few people before I pitch a story. What do you do that?
I usually don't. Yeah, I really shoot at the hip with my stories. So like, I mean, there has to be enough, at least in the details in the history, that I can personally tell the story and make sure that it's interesting. Like it might not be a matter of pre-interviewing people so much, but if I think that there's enough there that the story will be there regardless of who I talk to. That's like one parameter for me.
Yeah. One question here. Do you guys script with specific music in mind? BPMs or music fit the rhythm? Thank you very much for asking, Nick. How do you do it? What do you do?
So I make a playlist for every single episode that I work on.
That's really
I'm not a dream board person. Like I don't think as visually as I should. But I always make a playlist of what I want the vibe to be because like I said before, I'm kind of loosey-goosey when I start like writing and outlining and that kind of thing. So right. I have an energy that I want to kind of portray, but that's about it. Like not about BPMs, but like for the Twine piece in particular, like I purposefully sought out like road music and like really like corny music, like a lot of Tom Jones.
Yeah.
But what about you?
I also, I mean, I think the way I usually do it is like I've been lucky to get to work with composers quite often. So like the UFC story, I got to work with this guy, Chris Terry, and he asked me to send him a mood board, which was like nice. 5 or 6 songs that you kind of want to tie it all together. And like some of that was obvious. Like I knew we needed a fake UFC theme song to play in one scene. So I was like, do something like this. But for other parts of it, or like the Ocean's 11, I was like, I want this to have an Ocean's 11 vibe. And then he did a very good job and made music that sounded a lot like the theme song from Ocean's 11 in a way that I think was good and evocative. But yeah, I mean, other times, like I will sometimes when I'm editing I'll drop in bed tracks. I know some people don't like that, which is like a song or music from some pre-existing thing to be like, just to get a sense of the pacing and if the clips are working together or not. So I actually do drop in bed tracks. I know some people hate that, especially like if you're working with a composer and you want to give them a lot of, if you want to give them like a lot of creative autonomy and stuff. I mean, we're really lucky on the show. We get to work with Sean Royale.
Yeah. Sean is like
best.
The best. Like she's like a genius. Like
yeah.
Like I like with working with Sean, I've noticed like before when I first started working on pieces, I would send her my playlists of things that like my mood board. And I realized that's not like the best way. So I'll either give her some incredibly hyper specific, like I need you to do a copycat of this song, or I'll just let her kind of go and give her like, I'll give her like a dry, unmusicked, cut of the story. And she kind of writes around the pacing and the flow. So she's really, really good at capturing vibes. And like, without me even having to communicate to her what parts that I need scored, she knows which parts that I'm thinking. So like, I'm just, lucky.
Sean's the best also because you and I have both given her recently ridiculous assignments and she did so well. Like
knocked it out.
I was like, I think we need a fake Who Let the Dogs Out.
Yeah.
For 99 PI, she's like, amazing. And then she came back and it was perfect. And you were like, we need a fake Pokemon song.
Yeah. And it was just like, oh my God, I'm going to like exercise to this song. So good.
There was a question here for if you're willing to share any playlists, Vivian, with stories ever. Yeah.
Sure. I could make them public and send them to, send them to Martin if he wants to share them on some stuff.
Yeah, that'd be really cool. I think we'll also post details in the YouTube page on like what each of us, where you can find each of us in the work. Crystal, thanks for listening, Crystal. This means a lot. Have there been stories for either of you that didn't quite work for 99 PI pursued on your own? How much does working on a show with a set style influence your storytelling instincts? Really good question. I haven't been there that long, so that hasn't been an issue yet.
It's been like a year.
I guess it has been, hasn't it?
Isn't that crazy?
I know, it's great. It's amazing.
Time flies.
Yeah.
It's like a weird alternate universe working on 9API.
I've had stories, like I had a story that I pitched to 30 for 30 that didn't go, about football and concussions. And like, I kept trying to find another place to do that story. Like, I think that how much does the show set parameters influence things? Like something I didn't understand how to do at first was because the show is a very specific style, which is like you are co-telling the story with Roman. Like Roman is there as like the anchor and the continuity across episodes. And I just didn't know what, like, how it, like you have to learn how to kind of write for Roman. You have to learn like what parts to give to Roman. Like often it is like the informational stuff, but also like
he gets
Roman
the one-liners.
he gets a lot of great one-liners because he's really good at delivering them. So there's like all these ways that you have to write for this show that are very different from writing for other shows. And I mean, it's also like what story works for 99PI doesn't work elsewhere. And that's like it's a moving target, and it's like like we just did an episode on the origins of the song "Who Let the Dogs Out," which is something that isn't design specific, but it is about like human creativity, and it is about like how things get made and collaboration in a way that are all like tied into the show, I think, in a really interesting way. So I can always kind of tell when someone is trying to force a story into 99PI because they will do a pitch that includes the word design that really they'll say, and that is how you design a family. It's like, nope. This is a story about your family. This is great for somewhere else, but not here. So that's something that's always kind of moving around. So and it hasn't come up too often because I mean our workload is pretty intensive at 99PI. So if we were to pitch a story that's not right for our show, and if we were to pursue it on our own, like I've had ideas that I've wanted to pursue outside of the show, but I'm tired all the time. So I just haven't yet. Everyone's tired all the time.
So I mean, like the weird thing about my podcast career is that it's only 99PI. Like this is actually the first podcasting job I've ever had.
Right.
Aside from doing like a contest where I didn't know what I was doing. That was like my audition tape, I guess. So I really don't know what my voice sounds like outside of the show. So we'll see.
Lots of really good Twine puns happening in the feed right now.
Nice.
Is Vivian's Twine playlist scored with a lot of string quartets. Really
nice,
good
Helen.
point. Helen Zaltzman.
Point for Helen Zaltzman.
Oh my God, composed on a Twine way. That's incredible.
Oh,
Vivian, I guess before we wrap up, so obviously people should check out 99% Invisible, the show we work on, which is my favorite show, and I'm very excited that people like it. Is there any other thoughts on storytelling around podcasting that you want to impart while we have this wrapped audience?
I'm like the worst person to ask this question because I have no idea what I'm doing. I don't know. Yeah.
That's certainly not true, but
I'm one of those people that I don't know what I'm doing until I've already done it. Yeah. Does that make sense? So I'll write a story. I'm like, oh, that's what I did. That's why I did it. I understand now. I should be in therapy. Anyways. So what about you, Chris? Any parting thoughts?
Roman gave me a really good piece of advice a while back. Our boss, Roman Mars, who hosts 99% Invisible, we were working on a story, and I was convinced that one structure thing had to work a certain way, and then somebody else found a much better way than that. And I was like, man, I can't believe I'm still learning stuff at this point. And Roman was like, here's the thing. You work for years and you master it and you think you know everything that there is to be done. And then somebody does something you've never seen before, and your entire sense of self-confidence is just completely thrown. He's like, there's always something new. There's always something new and interesting and experimental that just throws you off completely.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that is kind of humbling, and hearing that from him, someone who really, really knows what he's doing, was incredible to hear. Because I guess it's just always play around and never try to, try to find new ways to tell stories and don't get too stuck in your way, but also now that we're sharing Roman Mars wisdom, one thing that he said to me was
like in an employee review, he's like, because I was not mad, but I was upset that I'm not better at certain things. But just recognize what you're good at, because it's not going to be the same as somebody else. Like I'm not the best editor, but I'm good at other things. So just lean into the things that you're good at.
Good advice, Vivian. Yep. This has been a total pleasure.
It's been fun. Stripey fun.
Thanks for talking to us, everybody. You can find me at Chris Berube on Twitter and Vivian at obviously at #1 Rockstar USA on Twitter.
Yes, exactly. Okay. Yeah, that's it. Yeah. Just tweet at that, please. Thank you.
You're Vivian H. Lay on Twitter? What are you on Twitter?
I am. Yeah, Vivian H. L-E. That's it.
Absolutely.
And tweet at us.
Thanks. Tweets. Lovely to meet you. Thanks everybody.
Guys. Can I leave? I'm going to leave.
I'm going to leave. All right. Let's get out of here.
Bye.